Lieutenant Sarah Martinez looked like any other nurse at Fort Campbell Medical Center. Soft voice, gentle hands, always putting patients first. For 3 years, soldiers saw her as the caring woman who patched them up after training accidents and checked their blood pressure during routine visits. What they didn't know was that before becoming a nurse, Sarah was a decorated Army Ranger who had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan. And when that armed intruder broke into the pediatric ward at 2:47 a.m., those same soldiers were about to discover what a real warrior looks like. Welcome to Veteran Stories. Before we begin this powerful story of hidden strength, protective instincts, and the warrior spirit that never truly sleeps, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Sometimes the most dangerous people look the most harmless. Fort Campbell Medical Center operated 24/7, serving one of the largest military installations in the United States. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, 29 years old, had been working the night shift in the pediatric ward for 3 years. To everyone who knew her, she was simply Nurse Sarah, the woman with the warm smile who could calm a crying child with a single touch. Sarah stood 5 feet 4 inches with shoulder-length brown hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her scrubs were always pristine, her manner always professional yet caring. She had a reputation for going above and beyond, staying late to read to sick children, bringing homemade cookies for young patients, always volunteering for the most difficult cases. The pediatric ward was her domain. She knew every child's name, every parent's worry, every doctor's preference. Soldiers who'd been treated by her spoke of her gentleness, her ability to distract them from pain with stories and jokes. Many didn't even realize she held the rank of lieutenant. She never acted superior, never pulled rank, never made anyone feel small. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had a carefully buried past, one she'd deliberately left behind when she'd retrained as a nurse. Tuesday night, 2:30 a.m. The pediatric ward was quiet except for the soft hum of monitors and the occasional whisper of nurses making their rounds. Sarah was checking on room 314, where twin boys, ages 7 and 9, were recovering from surgery. Their father, Staff Sergeant James Wilson, was deployed to Iraq. Their mother, exhausted from days of worry, had finally gone home to sleep. "How are you feeling, Lucas?" Sarah whispered to the older twin, who was awake and staring at the ceiling. "My tummy hurts," he said quietly. "I know, sweetie, but you're being so brave. Your daddy would be so proud." She adjusted his blanket and checked his IV. "Try to get some sleep. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything." Sarah continued her rounds, checking on other young patients. There was 6-year-old Emma, daughter of a Navy officer recovering from pneumonia. 10-year-old Marcus, son of an Air Force pilot who'd broken his leg during a baseball game. Each child was someone's world, someone's reason for everything. The ward was her responsibility, and she took that seriously. Very seriously. At 2:47 a.m., Sarah was at the nurse's station updating charts when she heard it, the sound of breaking glass from the stairwell. Her pen stopped moving. In most hospitals, this might not immediately alarm someone, but this was a military installation, and Sarah's training from years past kicked in instantly. She listened carefully. Footsteps, heavy boots, trying to move quietly but failing, the sound of someone who didn't belong, moving with purpose toward the pediatric ward. Sarah's demeanor changed completely. The gentle nurse expression disappeared, replaced by something harder, more alert. She moved silently to the security monitor and saw him, a man in dark clothes, carrying what appeared to be a weapon, making his way up the stairs toward her floor. Her first thought wasn't about herself. It was about the children sleeping in rooms down the hall. Lucas and his brother, Emma, Marcus, all of them vulnerable, defenseless, depending on her to keep them safe. Sarah reached for the panic button, but the man appeared on her floor before she could activate it. He was bigger than she'd expected, over 6 feet, heavily built, moving with the confidence of someone who'd done this before. "Nobody move," he said, pointing what she now confirmed was a handgun at her. "Where's the drug cabinet?" Sarah's voice remained calm, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. The caring nurse was still there, but underneath, Something else had awakened, something that had been dormant for 3 years. "Sir, you need to leave," she said quietly. "This is a children's hospital ward." He laughed, a sound that made her skin crawl. "I don't think you understand the situation, lady. I'm asking the questions here." But Sarah did understand the situation, better than he could possibly imagine. What the intruder didn't know was that before Sarah Martinez had learned to start IVs and administer medications, she had learned to clear buildings and neutralize threats. Before she'd studied pediatric care, she'd studied combat tactics. Before she'd devoted herself to healing, she'd been trained to eliminate dangers to innocent people. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez hadn't always been a nurse. From 2015 to 2018, she'd been Army Ranger qualified, one of only a few dozen women to ever earn that distinction. She'd completed 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan, serving with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Her job had been to go where others couldn't, do what others wouldn't, and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The transition to nursing hadn't been accidental. After losing several squad members in her final deployment, Sarah had decided she wanted to save lives instead of taking them. She'd used her GI benefits to study nursing, specifically pediatric care. She wanted to help the children of military families, to give back to the community that had given her purpose. But training like hers doesn't just disappear. It goes dormant, waiting. The intruder moved closer, and Sarah quickly assessed the situation with skills she hadn't used in years but hadn't forgotten. He was armed, but holding the weapon casually, overconfident. He was bigger but moving slowly, expecting compliance rather than resistance. He was focused on her, not watching his surroundings. Most importantly, he was between her and the children's rooms. "The drug cabinet is down the hall," Sarah said, her voice still gentle, still non-threatening. "But sir, there are sick children here. Please don't hurt them." "Just show me where it is and nobody gets hurt," he said, but his tone suggested he hadn't really thought through the "nobody gets hurt" part. Sarah began moving toward the hallway, but she wasn't leading him to drugs. She was leading him away from the children's rooms, positioning herself between him and the most vulnerable patients on the floor. As they walked down the hallway, Sarah could see room 314's door slightly ajar. If Lucas was still awake, if he looked out and saw this man with a gun, the thought made something primal rise in her chest. These weren't just patients to her. Over 3 years, they'd become her children to protect. Their parents trusted her to keep them safe while they couldn't be there. Their fathers and mothers were deployed, serving their country, depending on people like Sarah to watch over what mattered most to them. The intruder pushed her forward roughly. "Hurry up." That was his mistake. Not just pushing her, but turning his back on room 314, where she could see Lucas's little face peering around the doorframe, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The gentle nurse disappeared entirely. What remained was a ranger, a warrior, a protector who had been activated by a direct threat to children under her care. What happened next lasted less than 30 seconds. But for Sarah, it felt like muscle memory taking over. In one fluid motion, she disarmed the intruder, using techniques drilled into her during months of combat training. The weapon clattered across the floor, far from his reach. The man was bigger, but Sarah had been trained by the best fighters in the world. Size meant nothing when you knew exactly where to strike, how to use leverage, how to end a threat quickly and definitively. By the time security arrived, alerted by the sound of the struggle, the intruder was unconscious on the floor, zip-tied with supplies from a medical cart, and Sarah was already back at room 314, gently closing the door and whispering to Lucas that everything was okay. Hospital security found Sarah calmly sitting beside Lucas's bed, holding his hand while he tried to process what he'd seen. "Lieutenant Martinez," said the head of security, a former Marine named Thompson. "What happened here?" "An intruder attempted to access the drug cabinet," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "He's contained and ready for police custody." Thompson looked at the unconscious man, then at Sarah's unmarked uniform, then back at the scene. "Ma'am, how did you—" "Previous training," Sarah said simply. Thompson had been a Marine for 20 years before his security job. He recognized the tone, the economy of words, the way Sarah sat, alert but calm, ready but not tense. This wasn't a nurse who'd gotten lucky. What kind of previous training? Sarah looked at Lucas, who was starting to drift back to sleep, feeling safe again. The kind that prepares you to protect people who can't protect themselves. By morning, the story had spread throughout Fort Campbell. The gentle pediatric nurse had single-handedly neutralized an armed intruder, protecting an entire ward of military children. But the details were confusing to people who only knew Nurse Sarah. Major Patricia Williams, the hospital administrator, called Sarah into her office. "Lieutenant, I've been reviewing your file. Before your nursing career, you were Rangers?" "Yes, ma'am. 75th Ranger Regiment, 2 deployments." "And you never thought to mention this?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Ma'am, I became a nurse because I wanted to heal, not hurt. I thought that part of my life was behind me. But when those children were threatened, I remembered that healing sometimes requires protecting." Word spread quickly through the base. Soldiers who had been treated by Sarah began talking, sharing stories, connecting dots they'd never noticed before. "Remember how she never flinched when that training accident brought in those guys with shrapnel wounds? She knew exactly how to treat that gunshot wound from the range accident, like she'd seen combat injuries before. The way she moves, I just thought she was really efficient. But now..." Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a patient Sarah had treated for a training injury, shook his head in amazement. "I thanked her for taking care of me, and she said, 'It's what we do for each other.' I thought she meant nurses. She meant Rangers." The children's parents began arriving as news spread. Staff Sergeant Wilson, granted emergency leave from Iraq, found Sarah in the same place she always was, at his son's bedside. "Nurse Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I heard what happened, how you protected them." "They're good boys," Sarah said. "Lucas was very brave." Wilson looked at her differently now. They told me you were Rangers." "I was. Now I'm a nurse." "No," Wilson said firmly. "You're both. You're exactly what you need to be, when you need to be it." Later that day, something unprecedented happened at Fort Campbell Medical Center. A group of Army Rangers in full-dress uniform arrived at the pediatric ward. They'd heard about one of their own, about what she'd done. Staff Sergeant Kevin Murphy, Sarah's former squad leader from Afghanistan, was among them. "Martinez," he said when he saw her. "Murphy." She smiled for the first time since the incident. "Heard you had some excitement last night." "Just doing my job." "Which job?" Murphy grinned. "Nurse or Ranger?" "Both," Sarah realized. "Always both." The Rangers had come to do something important. Murphy presented Sarah with a framed photo, her old squad from Afghanistan, all of them together before their final mission. "You never stopped being one of us," Murphy said. "You just found a different way to serve." The ceremony was small but meaningful. Hospital staff watched as Rangers honored their former comrade, not for leaving the service, but for continuing it in a different form. "Rangers lead the way," Murphy said. "Rangers lead the way," Sarah replied. It was the first time in 3 years she'd said those words. They felt right. In the weeks following the incident, Sarah's role at the hospital evolved. She was still the gentle pediatric nurse, still the woman who sang lullabies and brought cookies, but now she was also something else, a protector whose presence gave parents peace of mind, knowing their children were guarded by someone with the skills to keep them safe. The hospital administration created a new position for her, pediatric security liaison. She would continue her nursing duties but also help train other staff in emergency response, coordinate with base security, and serve as a bridge between medical care and protective services. 6 months later, Sarah was reading to a group of young patients when a new nurse joined the staff. Lieutenant Jennifer Park, fresh from nursing school, eager to help military families. "Any advice?" Jennifer asked during her first week. Sarah looked at the children, some with parents deployed, others with families dealing with the unique stresses of military life. All of them needing someone who understood that caring for military children meant more than just medical care. "Remember that these kids are part of something bigger," Sarah said. "Our parents serve our country, which means we serve their families. Every child here is depending on us to be whatever they need: healer, protector, advocate, friend. And if something goes wrong? Sarah smiled, thinking of her two careers, her two callings, her two ways of serving the same mission. Then you be what the situation requires. Always. Some people serve their country in uniform, carrying weapons and facing enemy fire. Others serve in scrubs, carrying stethoscopes and facing suffering. Sarah Martinez served in both ways, but she learned that they weren't really different at all. They were both about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, about being willing to stand between danger and innocence, about answering the call when others needed you most. The gentle nurse and the fierce warrior weren't opposite sides of her personality. They were the same side, expressed in different circumstances. Both required courage, both demanded sacrifice, both meant putting others before yourself. That night in the pediatric ward, when evil walked toward sleeping children, Sarah Martinez didn't choose between being a nurse or being a ranger. She chose to be both, because that's what the children needed. Have you ever met someone like Sarah? Someone who seemed gentle and ordinary until circumstances revealed their true strength? Someone whose past prepared them for a moment they never expected to face? Tell us their story in the comments. Share how hidden warriors have protected you or your community. Because at Veteran Stories, we believe that heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the most dangerous people look the most harmless. Subscribe if this story moved you, because every community has protectors hiding in plain sight, and their stories deserve to be told.